Okay, we're going to talk about setting up and solving real-world word problems. We've done this as we have gone through the unit. Every time we've solved equations, you have had a real-world word problem. This is just a little more practice. We're going to do 4 or 5 questions together so that you can see it done just a little more practice, and then tomorrow in class you'll work on this. So our first question, find 2 consecutive odd integers in which their sum is equal to one more than 3 times the smallest. It's a consecutive integer problem. You've seen one of these before, but this time they are consecutive odd. So anytime you have consecutive integer problems, you have the first number, the second number, and any more that they've asked for, but in this case only asked for 2. Unless it gives you information otherwise, the first number you're always going to call x, or whatever variable you choose. Unless they have said something specific about the first number, then that's what you will use. But in this case, they didn't. They just said, okay, the first one's going to be x. The second one, since we're talking about consecutive odd integers, is 2 past the original. So like if the first one is 1, then the next consecutive odd integer will be 3. And the only way to get there is to add 2 to the original. So when you're doing consecutive odd or even, the first number is x, the second one's x plus 2, and you continue adding 2 through the pattern. Now they tell you their sum is equal to, so their sum, which means I have to add these 2 together. Well, x plus x is 2x plus 2, and it's equal to one more than 3 times the smallest. Well, x is the smallest, so 3 times the smallest and 1 more. So I'm going to have to solve this equation. Every equation we have done to this point that had variables on both sides, I have put the variable on the left. This one, I'm going to move the variable to the right. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because if I cancel out the 2x by subtracting on both sides, I get a positive x remaining. If I do it the other way, you end up with a negative x, and I try to avoid negatives if at all possible. So I'm going to cancel out 2x here and cancel out subtract 2x here, so I have 2 equals, that becomes 1x plus 1. Then I subtract the 1 so that the x is all by itself, so 3 equals x. So that tells me that this number, the first integer, is 3. The second consecutive odd integer is going to be that plus 2, so it is, whoops, that's a 2, so it is 5. So your 2 integers are going to be 3 and 5, and it did say to find both, so the fact that I did that twice is totally fine. So let's try the next problem. 1/5 of a number plus 5 times that number is equal to 7 times the number less 18. I got to set this up. Step 1, I need to define my variable. We're going to let n equal the number. So n is going to represent the number I'm looking for. Now let's start setting it up. 1/5 of a number, there's 2 ways to write it. You can write it like this, or you can write it like this. I prefer the second way because it's just going to make things easier for simplifying. It doesn't matter which one you use. The operations will be the same. I just prefer the second one. It's a little prettier, neater. So 1/5 of a number plus 5 times that number is equal to 7 times the number less 18. This just saying less is the same thing as saying minus. It's not less than, so it doesn't flip-flop the order of things. It's just less, so that means 7 times the number less 18. It's just like saying minus. My very first step is going to be to cancel out this 5 in the denominator. So I don't have division or this fraction happening. But to do that, I have to multiply by 5 on both sides. These 5s cancel each other out, so I'm left with just an n. But I also have to multiply 5 times this one, and 5 times 5n is 25n. So now I've taken care of that. I don't have silly little fraction any longer. But then I have to multiply 5 over here, so I have 35n minus 90. Because I did 5 times 7 and 5 times 18. Now let's talk about, I have like terms, so I can combine like terms here. N plus 25n is 26n is equal to 35n minus 90. Now, Before in the last problem, I said I try to avoid negatives if at all possible. In this case, I could avoid the negatives, but it makes the problem more complicated. So I'm going to end up with a negative here. It's just easier not to try and avoid it. Since there is nothing but a 26n over here, there's no plus or minus anything, it's just 26n, it makes sense to get the variable on the left. So I'm going to subtract 35n from here to cancel, and subtract 35n here to be fair. That makes negative 9n equals negative 90. Don't forget to bring that minus sign with it. So to get n by itself, I'm going to divide by negative 9 on both sides. So I get that n equals positive, because the two negatives make a positive 10. So there is your answer. Now this kind of question shows up in two places. It's going to show up here like variables on both sides. It is also going to show up when we talk about something called systems of equations. And it would be really, really great if you can remember when we get to systems of equations that this is one way to solve this kind of problem. Because what will happen when we get to systems of equations is we will try to make this kind of problem more complicated than it doesn't need to be. So, a moving company charges $800 plus $16 per hour. Another moving company charges $720 plus $21 per hour. How long is a job that costs the same no matter which company you use? So you have two companies, Company A and Company B. Company A is $800 plus $16 an hour. Company B is $720 plus $21 an hour. I want to know the point at which they are equal, because it says, where do they cost the same? That means equal. That means I want Company A to equal Company B. And I just need to find out what H equals so that I know what number of hours it takes for them to be the same. So I'm going to solve this like I've been solving equations for a while. Let's start by subtracting 16h. This, remember, will give me a positive h at the end, and I don't have to deal with negatives because I don't have to. So I have 800 equals 720 plus 5h. Now let's subtract 720 to cancel out, which leaves me with 80 equals 5h. If I divide both sides by 5, I get that h equals 16. So it takes 16 hours for the two companies to be the same no matter what. So if you're going to move and it's going to take you exactly 16 hours to move, it doesn't matter which company you choose. However, if it's going to take you less than 16 hours, you're going to want to use the cheaper of the two companies. If you look at the two things, you can just plug it in and figure out which one is cheaper. But if you're going to want to go more than 16 hours, you will want to use the other one. But the point where they're equal is 16 hours. Now it asks for what would the cost be. So taking this equation, okay, we know it's going to be 16 hours, and we know that they are equal. It doesn't matter which moving company's expression you use to find out the cost. You plug in 16 to here or 16 to here, and it's going to be the same amount. That's the reason we found the 16. So I'm just going to go with the first one. So it is 800 plus 16 times 16, because it was 16 hours. And so I end up with 800 plus 256. And when I add those together, I get that it would cost me $1,056 if it took me 16 hours to move. And guess what? It will cost me $1,056 whether I use Company A or Company B, because they are equal at 16 hours. Alrighty? Okay. So this question is important. Average questions show up a lot, and they're the kind that we tend to have trouble with. So let's just read through it and then talk about what we know. Brady's scores on his last 4 algebra tests are 84, 79, 94, and 98. We want the score that he must make on the next test if he wants his average to be exactly 5 points less than the unknown test. We want to find his new average. So there's two questions here. First, we got to figure out what his unknown test needs to be. Okay? So we're going to let x be unknown test. This is the test we don't know. We do, however, know 4 of his tests: 84, 79, 94, and 98. And if you think about what you know about averages, to find an average, you add up all the numbers and then divide by how many there are. Well, since I know I'm going to have to add to find average, the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and add up those 4 tests. So I'm going to do 84 plus 79 plus 94 plus 98. So far, he has 355 points accumulated in tests. I got that by adding those 4 numbers. To that, we have to add test number 5. So this is test 1, 2, 3, and 4 plus test number 5. So to find whatever that average is going to be, I have to divide by 5 because there are 5 tests now. That needs to equal, because we want his average to be 5 points less than the unknown test. So we want it to be the test minus 5. We now have an equation we can solve to find out what that unknown test needs to be, because that's the question, first question. We got to know the unknown test. So get rid of this denominator. We don't like to have it there. Clear out that fraction. So we have 355 plus x is equal to, but I have to multiply by 5 over here also, so I end up with 5x minus 25. I forgot my x. Okay, and so now I just start solving my equation. Subtract x on both sides. So you have 355 equals 4x minus 25. So now we'll add 25 on both sides. Yes, I just did that the long way. You'll learn I either do it on the calculator or I have to write it all out. Now to get what x equals, I need to divide by 4 because I was solving an equation. And so I get that 380 divided by 4 is going to be 95. So the new test has to be a 95. That's what his new test is going to be. Now the next question is, what's his new average? Well, to find his new average, I add all 5 tests now, and I divide by 5. Well, I know the first 4 tests add up to 355. So if I add 95 to that, I get 450. So I just added the 4 tests plus the 95, and then I divide by 5. His new average is a 90. I didn't really have to go through all of that because the question up here said he wants his average to be exactly 5 points less than the unknown test. Well, if the unknown test is 95, 5 points less than that is a 90. It all works like it should. But the important thing to remember about averages is that they are nothing more than a total of points. One last question. So the first side of a triangle is 8 meters shorter than the second side, and the third side is 4 times as long as the first side. Perimeter is 26. Find the length of each side. Well, let's get it labeled. Okay. The first side is 8 meters shorter than the second side. And then the third side is 4 times as long as the first. Well, the only thing they really don't give us information about is the second side. So the second side of this triangle is going to be x. So the first side is 8 meters shorter than that. And the third side is 4 times as long as the first one. They tell you the perimeter is 26, so I'm going to add all these up. But the first thing I'm going to do is simplify here. This is the same thing as 4x minus 32. I got that by doing distributive property. So we'll add them all up. X plus x is 2x plus 4x is 6x. Negative 8 minus 32 is negative 40. And it has to equal 26. To find the length of each side, solve this for x, then substitute it in. So come in tomorrow being ready to give me the length of each side. We'll double check it. All right, I will see you guys tomorrow. We will review. You have a test this coming Monday on September the 10th. I will see you tomorrow.